Max, just go ahead and let us know when we can get started.
Yes. Okay, we are live and ready to roll.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. So excited to have you all tonight. We're going to have a great discussion with some amazing candidates. I want to first thank Make Room, the new PAC, Political Action Committee, committed to progressive candidates, giving a voice and a platform to those who are truly viable and who deserve to have their voices heard. And tonight, those voices are going to be representing a community whose rights are currently potentially threatened, and we'll get into how that's the case. But before we jump into the substance of the conversation, I want to introduce our four amazing candidates. Two of them are running for Congress, two are running for state offices in New Hampshire. We have Mia Mason running in Maryland's 1st District. We have Pat Hackett running in Indiana's 2nd Congressional District. We have Carlos Cardona running in New Hampshire, Belknap 3. And Nikki Forty, also in New Hampshire, Hillsborough 20. So geographically diverse set of folks having here to have an amazing conversation about something that's truly relevant. So I'm going to hand it over to Mia first to go ahead and do a more formal introduction of herself.
Sure. I am in Maryland, a district that's the size of $2. I'm often known as a veteran, a friend, and because I've served our military for over 20 years in the Navy, the Army, and the DC National Guard. After getting kicked out by an administration in rules and policy, I fought back and got back in, and then eventually a president tried to tweet us out. So that led my life into doing a lot of advocacy. And after speaking at the Women's March, I also decided myself that I should be running for office to best represent our community and our state.
Thank you. Looking forward to asking you some pointed questions about that. It's really interesting. Pat?
I'm Pat Hackett, and I am in Indiana District 2, so 10 counties in northern Indiana. I'm in South Bend. This is Pete Buttigieg's home district, and he has endorsed my campaign, I'll add. But I'm running for Congress because I believe in dignity and justice for all, not the few. It's the core commitment of the nation, and I believe deeply we need to reclaim it as a nation. And I'm running specifically for the House of Representatives because the House of Representatives is the people's house and on the stump. And I deeply believe we have to reclaim our voice and values in Congress. And that's the voice and values of all the people of the district and the nation and all of our rich diversity, religious diversity, gender identity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, all of us. That's what pluralistic democracy is about. And I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight.
Great. Thanks, Pat. Carlos, brother?
I should unmute first. Will, thank you for having me. Carlos Cardona. I was the youngest elected official in 2007. I ran as a riding candidate in the state of New Hampshire, becoming the first elected official to be LGBTQ and Hispanic to run any school board in the state. And then now, if I win this race, I will be the first and only LGBTQ person of color at the State House of 400 members. That alone, that statement alone shows you why it's so important for me to win this race. My district deserves better, deserves a diverse voice, a young voice. The average age at the State House is over the age of 50. So I would probably bring the average age probably down to the 40s just by my presence being there and some other young people that are running, such as Nikki. And then for LGBTQ, probably 1 out of maybe 15 LGBTQ candidates in the state, including Nikki. So for me, it's so important that we have diverse voice, young voices. In an era where technology is driving the workforce and driving our state and our country, I think it's super important that we have people that have experience with technology in the sectors that technology has been wiping out, and where people are losing their jobs fastly, not adding the pandemic that we're currently going through. So for me, I live in the Lakes region. It's driven by tourism in the state of New Hampshire. It accounts for 70% of the jobs. I work in the hotel industry, so for me, that's a voice that I plan on bringing in to represent the workers of the hotel industry. So thank you for having me.
Of course, thanks, Carlos. Last but not least, Nikki.
Hi, thank you for having me. As a caution, I've got my 2 dogs here and they might start barking. They're just excited and happy for the discussion. So I am running in Hillsborough County, District 20, which is the town of Litchfield. Litchfield is a strange, wonderful little town sandwiched between 2 big cities. I'm up against some hard, stiff competition, some older gentlemen who don't think that I should have rights as a woman, as a bisexual woman. And I'm willing to bring a really different, fresh perspective to the State House. I am a social worker and a drug and alcohol counselor by trade, and I feel that this makes me uniquely qualified for public office. I'm used to having to connect with whoever that person is across the table from me, finding ways to help them improve their lives and reach their own goals. So I do, while I am very progressive, I'm very out front and outspoken, and have been that way for most of my life, I can connect with people all over the map, and that's very important, especially in the State House in New Hampshire. So I really just thank you so much for including me, and I feel that it is very important to have the B represented, the bisexual visibility, super important, and I'm here for it, and really, really excited for this discussion. Thank you so much.
Of course. Well, I personally want to thank all the candidates who've stepped up to the plate. I know what it takes, and the additional scrutiny when you are a member of the LGBTQ community and you put yourself out there in a very public way. You're inviting, your identity, for better or worse, to attract attention as well. And that's unfortunate, but it's an opportunity to sort of be a voice and represent our community. And so I'm so excited that you are doing what you're doing and joining us tonight. I just want to hop right in because we can't really avoid the headlines of today. I mean, it seems the headlines are changing hourly, but for at least 1 hour this morning, the headline was Alito and Thomas issuing a stinging rebuke of their Obergefell decision in 2015. And obviously, we've seen, if we know women's rights and Roe is under attack 50 years later, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that our right to marry is potentially under attack 5 years later. But I do want to sort of get all of your thoughts on how that news struck you. And for anyone who's watching and sort of, with everything's happening, I wouldn't blame anyone for not knowing sort of or hearing about it. But basically what happened today, Alito and Thomas signaled, I believe it was a signal, and you all can sort of give me your thoughts on what you believe it was, that their Obergefell decision was cavalier, treated religion cavalierly, and prioritized and gave more substance to LGBTQ rights than religious rights. And I guess we'll start in reverse order. Nikki, how did that strike you?
I think it's one of those sort of pit in your stomach kind of things where, okay, maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but it still just really gets those emotions going, and it reminds me that there are a lot of local and state laws that have been left on the books, criminalizing being gay, being all sorts of stuff. It gets me so, I think I'm still kind of a little tongue-tied about it. But realizing that, I think, we did celebrate 5 years ago, and rightly so, and I remember it very, very vividly. but that, unfortunately, the way that things are set up in this country, and it seems like they're not going to look at the precedent, when it's such a recent precedent, that I feel like we need to fight. We have to get ready, because I do see it as a signal.
Yeah. Carlos, do you agree it's a signal of some sort?
I do, and I'm not surprised by it, honestly. As soon as I saw it on social media, I almost had a statement ready for it. It is without question that when this administration went and this current Supreme Court has gone after immigrants in this country, that gay people would be next. When one person's rights are at stake, everybody's rights are at stake. So my warning to everybody that is listening and to anybody that is conscientious about what's happening in our country, don't hesitate for a minute just because they're going after our rights, that they're not going to go after yours next. Women have been targeted by the Supreme Court many times, the conservative wing of the Supreme Court, and by conservative politicians in this country. LGBTQ, we're not immune to it, as we can see. I really think that they're just going to, little by little, if they are able to strike this down, Title I and on all different disability acts will be next, which I think it will be devastating for our country and our democracy. So I think it's important that we definitely see this as a warning, and we need to get rid of this current president, because he holds the key to the future of the Supreme Court.
Absolutely. And for Pat and Mia, when we talk about, it's definitely a signal. And I saw a stat, since 2015, 300,000 gay marriages have occurred. And that's 600,000 people who have, and it's what's so interesting and fascinating is, when you read the statements from Alito and Thomas, and they believe it was inaccurately decided, but there's over 1,000 economic benefits in our tax system, and that was in place before Obergefell, and so how does that sort of strike you, the threat that would be rescinded when if people don't have access to those, if we're going to get really sterile about it, those economic incentives that they've put in place for marriage, you discriminate against an entire class of people, sort of, it just seems particularly pernicious.
I think that they're just attacking us even if we pass away as well. Besides it being a signal, it's a direct attack against me and my family. It's an attack to what happened to many of us in the LGBT community on October 1st, 2013, when a soldier and her family was killed in Afghanistan. And then back at home in North Carolina, they didn't even get their benefits. They didn't even get the proper phone call because of religious views and freedoms. And then, 10 years ago, we got the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It's just, an attack on DOMA. It's an attack on Romer versus Evans of 1996. Mm-hmm. These are many things that they want to be able to do to segregate us even further, regardless of our communities. And we must stand with these decisions by the prior courts to make sure that we have that equity and equality. So for me, it's a personal attack.
Pat, I'm sure it's personal for you as well, no doubt.
Well, I think what I'd like to do is, I think it's personal to all Americans, actually, in terms of the values inherent in our Constitution and the rule of law. And so, what I want to say is, I want to go back to the initial framing. Mm-hmm. It's not correct in these statements for anyone to see that it's an issue of LGBTQ rights versus religious rights. That's an improper framing. Mm-hmm. Because the families I serve as an attorney primarily are, which include, it's a diverse population, include LGBTQ families, many of them married for religious reasons. And many of the mainline religions today recognize marriage equality. So it really, and there's a certain understanding of the human person informing those religious traditions that recognize marriage equality that is consistent with the jurisprudence and the lived experience that led to the Obergefell opinion. So those statements from the justices today, I would argue, are out of step with American jurisprudence and the lived experience of American families, persons, which include LGBTQ persons. So, the Obergefell opinion did not happen in a vacuum. It followed numerous cases throughout the nation within the federal courts and state courts that were consistent in the finding of a right to marry consistently under the 14th Amendment, so under equal protection and due process. So those were regrettable statements, and I think it signals a very unhealthy and frankly, ultimately, a move in the direction of the court that I would find very inconsistent with the Constitution and the understanding of human beings that are a part of American jurisprudence.
Yeah. And to that point, timing's everything. I don't think that they just woke up and decided, it seemed like a very, very intentional timing to make these kinds of statements. And, when we talk about, you're right, Pat, it didn't happen in a vacuum. It's happened in our society. And whether you look at the denominations that we know, recognize and hold gay ceremonies in their churches, or you have, it's one, like when you sort of build this false binary, and it's this versus, LGBTQ community versus religious freedom, as if there aren't LGBTQ Christians or Muslims or people who have deeply held religious beliefs. And so it's to frame it in that way, Pat, you're absolutely right. It's discouraging and just an affront, honestly, to all Americans.
The other quick thing I do want to add to put this in historical perspective is that if the best analogy is if you look at the Loving case in 1967, the Supreme Court opinion which decriminalized interracial marriage. Prior to 1967 in the Loving case, interracial marriage was criminalized in many of the states. And the majority of Americans did not support interracial marriage. More persons supported marriage equality at the time of the Obergefell opinion than interracial marriage. But the analogy is, if you look at the cases, they're the same arguments against interracial marriage as it is against marriage equality. And so that's I think that's very significant. And they were horrible references to scripture and, quote, religious arguments against interracial marriage. You move in that direction now into the law, you open up a Pandora's box of opportunities for discrimination, not only against the LGBT community, but other religious minorities, and you'll cause harm to the vulnerable in our community, including children, in the name of religion. So our founders are wise to have free exercise and establishment clause and recognize that law is developed based on evidence, science, and reason. We have marriage equality today because of evidence, science, and reason.
That's a fantastic point. Before we jumped on, I talked to, Carlos and Nikki, we talked about, you both are Catholic, I believe you said. And I wanted to briefly come back to this point, because we know with the timing of these statements and the pending nomination and potential vote on Amy Coney Barrett, that especially on the other side, they call out judicial activism all the time, as if the Federalist Society itself is sort of not propagating this within its ranks, and now it's making its way to the Supreme Court in the form of Amy Coney Barrett. And so when we see that occurring, and it's the signal, and what seems to be a religious cultural battle to get this, get Coney Barrett onto the Supreme Court, how does that strike your religious views? And just hearing from Pat, we know, in the discussion of how this doesn't occur in a vacuum, but we also know that this doesn't seem that controversial, even in the church these days.
I think as a Catholic myself, it's kind of flip-flop along with each administration, how we've been progressive into our religious views and our civil rights. I think that, with her as a nomination, it allows a lot more discrimination, not only for us as the sex, but for women, for their benefits, for their health care. It opens up the big Pandora's box that allows full discrimination against anyone based on their religious view. And honestly, they can just pick any little book out of the Bible or the Quran or any other religion and uphold it as their belief. And then what's next? The Supreme Court's going to then decide what is stoning. We could go down very dark avenues with one book, and we need to be able to be above that and protect everyone from the 14th to making sure that we even have the Equality Act coming forward. And that goes beyond our religion. It allows us to be uniform with everyone so that we can practice our own religion, home or with others.
Well, I definitely want to talk about this because to me, I mean, as a person that was raised Roman Catholic and my family takes our belief very seriously, and the journey that as a gay man I've taken with my religion, I find this disrespectful by the Supreme Court. I don't find them qualifying at all whatsoever to talk about religion. And considering that our founding fathers intended to and wrote it, the separation of church and state, the fact that two of our justices in the Supreme Court are willing to even pick a book out of the Bible to talk about law, I find that extremely disrespectful. This is something that we sometimes look at the Middle East and find frightening as LGBTQ people, where it's happening right here at home. And the fact, I think this is a real wake-up call for every LGBTQ, whether they're religious or not. And even the ones that are atheists should be even more alarmed by this, because atheism is still something that some religious organizations truly go after. So in a sense, we should treat atheism as a belief, because their rights will be violated as soon as this court starts deciding what their beliefs should be and what their lives should look like. But I also want to touch on something. When my partner and I got together 14 years ago and decided that we were going to get together, our intention was to create a family. And for me, as a Catholic, marriage means to create a family. And we have an 8-month baby named Jack and our little daughter, 5-year-old Sophia. It breaks my heart that this court, without knowing what my family looks like, without knowing my family, is going to decide whether my family is a family or not. And I think this goes even deeper. So I think it's super important that we as Americans, we stand up and say, it's not up to the Supreme Court to decide what our families should look like. We teach our kids from the very young age in all families that all families are different. And they're all great and that they're all validated. And what this Supreme Court is doing is picking the LGBTQ family, separating them from the rest of America and saying, you're not a family. And that's what they actually meant by that. So I think we should not take it lightly. Our kids will pay the price, because it will also mean no health insurance. It would also mean, when you're buying a house, basically, if there's ever a divorce, God forbid, you won't have an equal right to that home. So it's just a million things that happen. There's a lot of protections that go out the window as soon as marriage equality is out of the window. So when people talk about marriage equality, I almost feel like they always think of the kiss and the wedding and the cake. They don't think about the home, the car, the bills, the taxes, the doctors, everything that goes with a family that they would be breaking by just getting rid of this decision that they made.
Yeah, and to that point, it's having a separate system in itself, having something that's separate but equal, but it's not equal by virtue of being separate. And so, that's the reason, civil unions, were never truly the remedy, honestly, in my opinion. But it's an interesting segue you bring up, your family and your children, Carlos, because there is a gay adoption case on the docket, and we're going to very soon know where the Supreme Court stands on these issues. It's the Catholic Charities versus Philadelphia, and the case involves referrals. And the city of Philadelphia stopped referring to Catholic Charities because they refused to basically consult with gay couples and members of the LGBTQ community in their adoption processes. And so it's deeply personal. And even the prospect of wanting to start a family or having already started one, and even, in the Obergefell decision, I remember reading the opinion, and they had cited the effects of children, but not that children would be negatively influenced. It was the fact that children that were seeing this occur in their own households or in society in general would think badly about these things that truly should be seen as on equal footing. And so it's an interesting perspective, and but it's also, given the court's potential leaning, very scary times. And so, Mia, Pat, or Nikki, do you have thoughts on sort of the pending docket and what we might be seeing?
Well, I think the pending docket is very significant because we want to be sure that discrimination doesn't normative, and I think that was Mia's point. Laws need to be generally applicable to all of us, and if we want an exception based on religion or something, it's incumbent upon us to justify that. And we have, there are some laws that have been passed that are highly problematic that make that difficult. They flip that on its head. RFRA is an example of that. Some of the state RFRA laws, the federal RFRA law. And so I think what we have to insist upon is the rule of law, and that is, that's developed again in action based on real families. Carlos's example, his real family, real lives, and the application of our constitutional principles to those real lives, and evidence, science, and reason. And the very striking thing, anyone who goes and read the federal opinions throughout the country, the arguments against marriage equality failed consistently because there was no rational basis to oppose marriage equality. And there isn't the religious argument, again, because we've already talked about that, because the individual religious liberty interest, that's all of ours, and it's protected in free exercise, but also the Establishment Clause. Mm-hmm. And so I think the real risk here is a fundamentalism, as Carlos mentioned, that it's risen in the East. We have fundamentalism in the West. We have to be very careful about that. It's inconsistent with Western democracy and our individual liberty interests in the common good. And we have to insist on the rule of law and an approach to cases in controversy that are based in evidence, science, and reason, and the well-being of society as a whole. And if we do that, I trust that we'll stay the course. But I'm very concerned with these statements, and there clearly is an agenda here, and there's some very important cases, and we have to make sure that discrimination against minority persons, whether it's because they're LGBTQ or because they're women, we have to be very careful to avoid that under the law, and we have to hold that accountable. That's why it's important we have very strong Congress. There's equal branches of government, and we're going to need really solid people in Congress if the courts overstep and cause harm to persons. Then equal branch can step in and pass laws to protect.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's many things that I find troubling about Amy Coney Barrett's nomination. Her work that she has done in affiliating with the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a group that is classified as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Their stance on marriage, is actually really focused on marriage for procreation. And as someone who has decided not to have children for personal reasons, medical reasons, all sorts of reasons that are no one's business, I have a huge problem with someone saying that, my marriage is less than because I don't have children. It's very, very concerning, some of these things and what people ascribe to marriage. And I think that, I think back to, being in middle school and high school, and I'm trying to figure myself out. We're all going through that process, and, questions of marriage equality would come up. And, it was, to some of my classmates, it was completely foreign to think that a marriage would occur outside of a church or outside of a synagogue, and that, so the coupling of marriage with as a religious ceremony, but we're not having that conversation about, we're not saying that we would restrict marriage to only religious people or not, so it's just very, very troubling. And Alliance Defending Freedom, I first became aware of them because they, when you run for state rep in New Hampshire, everyone and their cousin sends you their surveys to complete. And they were one of the groups, and I was like, I've never heard of them. And then I looked at it and I was very deeply concerned. And to know that there are people running for office, even in our little state, who are defending some of these principles, it's very disturbing, and I think we need to call it what it is.
I agree, and to be honest, as a trans woman, calling it like it is being realist. They're scared. Point blank, they're scared. They're scared of us being progressive. They're scared of us having equality. They're scared of us because they weren't taught better. They don't understand what diversity is. They don't understand what equality is. They don't know what equity is. And they want to tame their laws, tame their people, and make them property. And we're not. So we have to continue to stand up and fight. Because when you take a look at same-sex being on the ballot and in the court, and then abortion, and then of course our health care and our employment, everything will matter. And it won't matter if you're an immigrant. It is based on their religious freedoms that they are also scared, because that is what they were taught. So they wouldn't be able to allow that to be their form of discrimination, to stand up on their own 2 feet and be objectionable to what they believe in and force their belief on others, which is wrong. So even if you're an atheist or anybody else out there, Baptist, Protestant, you have to understand that there are more than just you and your religion out there. And that's why we have to have laws that are broad and encompassing of all of this. Because if we continue down a narrow path and saying that no one is allowed to do things, then our country will no longer exist.
What I found even also troubling, and so they also made the statement to Alito and Thomas that that there'd be more Kim Davises, and folks who are simply exerting their religious freedom will be called bigots. And what I took the biggest issue with was the fact that it's one thing if you're saying that every single religion, and it's theoretical, devil's advocate here, every single religion across the board, every religious person feels this way, but they don't. And so when you have a significant segment of each denomination in our country who pro-marriage equality, LGBTQ friendly, and so when even within denominations, when that's sort of at conflict, what's underpinning that animus, right? Because if you're saying half of the Catholic Church in the U.S. is fine, but the other half isn't, then like what's going on here? And you're right, Mia. I think there's a people are afraid of things they don't know or understand, and I think we saw this with Trump's election. Folks sort of clinging on to some sort of some form of what they believe should be the country or what should be the system, and that's what we need to keep in order. And it's deeply problematic, and it does infringe on people's rights, and it does impose on people's lives. And yeah, that's why tonight's conversation, I was so excited to have it, because this isn't theoretical for us. When these decisions get made, our lives change for the better or for the worse, and immediately. It's in the LGBTQ movement. It seems like we get these victories, and then suddenly we're in like a quagmire again. And we just had in this past June the discrimination, employment discrimination protection, which is huge. And it was a 6-3 decision. We had Gorsuch, and we had some of the conservative members, so that seemed safe. But we have these other rights that that seem like they're on the brink. That's sorry, Pat.
I think, but even in that opinion, in the Title VII case, if you read the latter part, there's a big exception that's signaled at the end of it, which is the ability for religious institutions, discrimination within religious institutions. And that's a very important case that is coming up. I think it's specific to marriage, though, I think it's very helpful for people to remember that marriage under the law is a civil contract. And that states and the government regulates marriage, so recognizes marriage, dissolves marriage, and you can have a religious institution. For example, the Catholic Church might not recognize the dissolution of the marriage, and yet it is dissolved under the civil law. Mm-hmm. And so whether one is a person of faith or not, you have the right now to marry under the law. And if you put if you understand that in religious terms, you have a right to do that with your First Amendment rights, and your church has the right to recognize that or not within your particular religious affiliation. But it's still, at the end of the day, that is a civil contract. Whether a person is of faith or not, you have a right. And where you get into a problem then is if in the comments made from the court today are problematic, because it's elevating one person's religious experience, and highly problematic, a public official, let's say a clerk, putting her interpretation of marriage on another citizen who may be marrying for religious reasons or not. And I guess my response to that is, if you don't agree, you shouldn't be in that role if you can't function in a diverse society with laws that provide a recognition under the 14th Amendment to marry. And, if they have an objection to the marriage, then the point there is don't go to the wedding. But you still have a duty in the public square to provide those services, because you're not simply representing your particular religious interpretation. And that's the dignity of the person on the other side of the counter and their rights under the law, whether they are religious or not.
Yeah, Pat, that's a great point to make, because this wasn't a private actor. This wasn't a private institution or a company. This was a person acting in their role as a government official on a local level, but still. And so it seems particularly pernicious. For absolutely. I think someone else had thoughts on that?
I want to add something real quick. I want to go back to the first question you asked. You said, is this a signal? Do you think it's a signal? And it very much is. What defines a signal? Well, the role of the Supreme Court is not to pass legislation. The role of the Supreme Court is to take cases that come to them and evaluate them and decide whether there's legality to it or not. And the signal here is they're signaling conservatives, send us a court case, because we might have the majority to override this kind of thing and change the law of the land. And I think that's super important, that these two Supreme Court justices are going out of their way to violate their oath, basically, as justices and judges. It's so to me, I still can't get over the fact that two justices would go out of the way before an election to signal the American public, like, this is the road we need to go down, considering everything that is going on in our country. We have a president that continues to violate the rule of law. We have a pandemic going on, hundreds and thousands of Americans dying, no jobs, no homes, kids not being able to attend school. It's just out of all these things, and they decide that they're going to signal the American public to, hey, let's go and infringe on people's rights. So I know that's kind of out of the question, but I've been thinking about it a lot. And the more I thought about it, I was like, it's absolutely a signal. That's what a signal would do, so.
Yeah, no, I think it was relevant to the question at hand. Absolutely. We have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to come back. I just wanted to let folks know who are watching, and I should have said this earlier. If you have questions, by all means, now is the time to submit them. We would love to use the last 10 minutes or so to answer any audience questions, or just have any additional points that folks want to have teased out from the panel, by all means. But Mia, go ahead.
So Carlos brought up an interesting point. It's because these two judges are basically not bound by any type of precedents. They also don't have any type of ethical, moral bearings in order to stay on point, to, honor the cloak that they wear, to keep blind to the justice that they have to be able to hand down. They're basically flaming our country and saying, you can do this now. It is not the way that it should be. They're opening up the can of worms and saying that we have the seats and the opportunity to do it because they have the upper hand now. It is time for us to make sure that we all together fight to make sure that we restore that equity and equality by bringing it up to, a constitutional level, and that's where they are. So us as legislators, we need to be able to make sure that we bind them ethically and hold them accountable so that they're not bought by corporations or religious organizations to persuade discrimination into our laws and together. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And I think we have our first question that just came in. But Mia, to that point, and we've been touching on this the whole night, but it's folks believing that their religious beliefs should outweigh even other folks within their own denomination, even the pew across the aisle. Their beliefs they are the true Christians, they are the true Muslims, or they are the true Jews, and these are when folks in your very own temple have it's for me it's entitled, it's selfish, and it's deeply problematic, because when this comes from the Supreme Court, what it's saying is this is what true religion is, and if this is not what you adhere to, then I guess you aren't really a part of this religion, which is problematic on more levels than I even can get into right now. But we have another question. We have a first question. The right, and this is from Nathan Morin. The right has they're in the right ideological spectrum, has the Federalist Society that teaches young lawyers a conservative legal approach and lobby for conservative judges on district courts and also the Supreme Court. What does the left or progressives have in response to that promotes a legal approach similar to RBG? And Pat, I'm sure you can answer this as well, but I know from when I went to the University of Texas for at Austin School of Law, and we had the American Constitution Society. They were the direct corollary, putting on similar programming, sort of the opposite perspective. They even would have debates with the Federalist Society students. But I would never forget my first interaction with the Federalist Society at UT. I was going to law school in Texas, and about half of that school was deeply conservative, if not more. And they were giving a free barbecue lunch with their talk, and I think they had this is 2012, and so they were 2010 actually, and they were having a discussion of what they had billed for us students was a discussion about the legality of gay marriage. And I went to this, and the free barbecue wasn't worth it. I could barely keep it down. And those are the kind of programs that they're putting on for law students who will eventually go clerk and will eventually become judges, and in the case of Amy Coney Barrett, make it to the Supreme Court maybe. But Pat, do you have anything to add about your experience with ACS or any other organizations?
No, I think the American Constitutional Society is definitely where you would want to look. It's very much engaged and vibrant in law schools throughout the country. And I think they're doing some excellent work, analysis and education and programming through the law school. So that's where you would want to go to look to the counterpoint to the Federalist Society. Even the language, I do want to point out too, Will, one of the thing that you just mentioned, so often we use this term conservative. I actually would take the position that support of marriage equality is actually the more conservative position to take, from a constitutional perspective, because it respects not only the Constitution, but it also respects cases in controversy, the development of the law, and stare decisis. And so the whole of the jurisprudence, it doesn't take an approach to the text as an originalist would do to justify a particular position, which frankly is problematic even in the approach to the text, but also disregards the rule of law as it's worked out in the crucible of the courtroom and real lives throughout the nation. And remember, in the Prop 8 case, it was Ted Olson and David Boies who argued that case, two of our preeminent constitutional scholars, lawyers. Ted Olson, who made the argument based on conservative principles and that it's good for society, good for families to recognize marriage equality. It's wholesome. Mm-hmm. And so I would submit that this is actually the more appropriate and, in the rich sense of the term, conservative and life-giving approach to the rule of law and Constitution.
That's a great point, Pat. Before we get to another question, Mia, you said some things earlier that I wanted to touch base on before in our last 10 minutes, because as a trans woman, you've served our country, and you've also felt the brunt of our country being not really treating you the way you should have been treated. And sort of, can you just shed light on that and sort of where the country should go and where the court may go?
Well, I can basically provide my own opinion, my own personal view
Absolutely.
on this. It was 2010. We're getting attacked 3 times a day. We have women that were training to be infantry, okay, so that they can teach the Afghan National Police. And we were teaching the Afghan National Army to do their job. There were police women in Afghanistan that were women. And that's why we were training our MPs to be infantry, women, infantry. And I am an infantry woman. I was starting my transition while deployed in Afghanistan and fighting for that equality. We've even seen women and men both freeze under combat, and also that women have also ended up pregnant while deployed in the same year. So when Don't Ask, Don't Tell ended, question 26 really did not include me. So I had to keep a secret. I had to be able to not get caught, not get outed. Now, I confided into the women of the LGBT community who knew me, what I was going through, and helped me maintain that until we did have equality. And after leaving active duty, I joined the DC National Guard, and I remember wholeheartedly the recruiter on the bus came on and says, if you're transgender, you need to go off this bus and we need to begin out processing. And he had his eyes on me and a couple other people trying to out us. And I thought Don't Ask, Don't Tell ended. So I continued on with my transition, completed it, and when we were getting ready to do more deployment paperwork and medical retirement type stuff, they found out in my veteran record that I was someone else, and they decided to discriminate against me and say that the laws, no matter if they are changing, they haven't changed in the military yet, but you're gone. And I said, you better do it very quickly. Told them to make it right. You can either keep me and understand the policies are changing, or allow me to fight you and you will lose. My commander says, I know everybody in DC. I don't think that's going to happen. Well, Honorable Defense Secretary Ash Carter came on television with President Obama and said that transgender service members were then allowed to serve. Spent that entire holiday weekend calling every attorney that I could. Most of them said that, you gotta have AIDS, you gotta have HIV, you make too much money, you don't make enough money. You have to be able to do so much. So even in our own LGBT community, I was still divided. I had to go at it alone, and it cost me a lot. It cost me my job, cost me my home, cost me my health as well. But I transitioned. I made it through. I've even made it through suicide and was able to be here today, to have a passion, to use what I've learned from to help others more than myself, to represent our communities of the LGBT community so that we're no longer divided, but we're united. To make that room in Congress to say that I can be the first. I didn't want to be the first, but we're going to try our hardest to make it happen. This is why we fight. This is why we've told other women to run for office so that we can succeed later on in their communities as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Mia. Everyone needed to know that and hear that, and it's powerful and it's meaningful. And what you said, make room. This is what this pack is all about. And when Max and his team wanted to have this conversation tonight, truly, I looked forward to it because I knew we were going to go deep into these discussions because it impacts our lives in such a deeply profound way. And you all are in the trenches doing the work, making room where people honestly aren't making room for you. And I know Max and his team, I speak on behalf of them when I know how they feel about making sure you are given the platform you need and the resources you need. And that's what Make Room does. And that's why it exists. Elevate these stories and elevate your candidacies and really get your stories out there to folks know that you're viable and that you're going to fight and do the good work and the great work to make this country what we know it needs to be. So thank you again for sharing that. And this may be our last question of the evening, and it's particularly pertinent. I'm hoping you all win, and if you do, then you will be, especially me and Pat and federally, and then Nikki and Carlos, on the state level. Leon Boone asked the question: the SCOTUS is going to be conservative for at least the next decade, if not longer. Breyer, liberal, is currently the oldest judge and likely, according to Leon, likely will not be there much longer. Thomas and Alito have at least 10 more years, and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh have probably 20 years. What does the fight for preserving LGBTQ rights look like in the face of a court that can't be relied upon, potentially for a few decades?
I think it's majority of us continue to do advocacy. Majority of us still to create cases. I was there on nightly news in 2017 when Donald Trump tweeted us and said that we no longer could serve. And it took over nearly 3+ years now for us to lift that transgender military ban. And they're still wanting to take it to the Supreme Court. This is where we continue our fight. Join an organization, help an organization, volunteer, and stand up for your own equal rights. Starts free.
I think in terms of specific to the question as well, again, the importance of having good people in Congress, because that's where laws are made. And it's an equal branch of government. We are not as American people, we are not at the mercy of a Supreme Court. An equal branch, the first article under our Constitution is the legislature, not the court, not the presidency. And so it is we the people through our representatives. And so we make laws and we can, the Equality Act is one example, and there are other things that can be done. I've highlighted RFRA as problematic. There are other laws that can be passed to provide protections and lots of things that Congress can do, and we have to exert our constitutional authority through Congress.
I also want to add, I want to quote a founding member of, and I say founding member of the LGBTQ community, but somebody who inspires us a lot, and that's Harvey Milk. And it's a quote that I live by, and it basically says, if you help elect more gay people, that gives the green light to all who feel disenfranchised, a green light to move forward. I think what we need to be doing as people in America is to elect as many diverse people as we can. That's how we're going to change the courts, because it's going to trickle up. We know that the trickle-down democracy hasn't been working for us. So it starts at your local office, from sheriff to school boards to county commissions if you have them. We do have them in New Hampshire, executive council, governor, state senate, state house representative, which is what I'm running for, and Congress and beyond. Here in the state of New Hampshire, we're known for sending very progressive voices to DC and sometimes to our state house. We have a congressman named Chris Pappas, who was the first gay man in our executive council and the first gay man to go to DC from New Hampshire. And so that's what it's going to take. If we think about it, the times that we have shattered the ceilings and we have really represented America is the times that we send diverse voices to office. We can't rely on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in my opinion, as a young person, is an outdated belief system. I really, as a person that has a bachelor's degree in history, it was really a way for America to please the monarchy system of England, really. We don't need that system, to be honest. I really think that we need to stop relying on the courts to decide for the American people. So I think we just need to focus on these diverse voices and just bring people with real experiences. I came to New Hampshire at the age of 16 from Puerto Rico as a homeless teen, and made it my way up and to living the American dream, having a home, a partner, and 2 beautiful kids and a house and a business. That's what we need to be fighting for, and we need more voices like that. So I think that quote that I use of Harvey Milk, it's very much what we need to be doing right now. I think as gay people, as LGBTQ community, we got complacent. We thought that marriage equality would solve all of our problems. And it clearly didn't. There are still some states that discriminate based on adoption and for surrogacies, where only one father could be on the birth certificate or one mother, or however you identify. So I think we have so much to change. Driver's license, immigration system. There are people that are still prohibited from coming into this country because of who they love or who they worship. So that's really where everything begins. The Supreme Court, it's a symptom of the problem that we have here in America. I don't think it's the full problem. So I think we need to focus on electing people that are qualified, have real life experiences, and truly represent the American public.
Yeah, I think it's anything that we got to keep this hope going, and we organize, we create coalitions, we connect, we have these kind of conversations where we're reaching across, state level candidates, federal candidates, all over the ballot, right? That there is power in numbers, and to connect with people who have similar ideas and thoughts, and to know that we are going to stand up for our rights, and that's not negotiable. I think it can be easy to say, oh, well, what can I do about the Supreme Court? That's so big, it's over there. I can't do anything about that, but you can, and it's by doing some of the things that Carlos mentioned, and I think everybody, things combating voter suppression, right? I mean, there's so many issues, and it's all, if there's anything I've learned on the campaign trail thus far, is that everything is connected. These issues are connected. And I've found that, power likes to protect itself. And so we need to take that power back, and we need to create our own power, and to say that we're here, we exist, what we have to say matters, and to continue to elect people into positions of power that are going to be bringing these voices forward and bringing stories like Carlos. Thank you for sharing. Really, Carlos and I, we've crossed paths many times, and I just we need you in the State House for sure. And listening to Mia and Pat, who I'm so glad to have met tonight. Those stories matter. Putting a face on this is not theoretical. That this is very personal, and it's not going away. We're not going away.
Well, Carlos, that quote was fantastic. And, just to close, I think it's a victory anytime you give someone the opportunity to see themselves on a ballot. And that's what you all are doing. And that's what whenever an LGBTQ person or a person of color or a woman runs for office, that's what they give people the opportunity to vote for themselves on the ballot. And being that voice matters, having that visibility matters, and what you are doing, and we'll continue to do, honestly, because win or lose, I know you all will still be in this fight, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure you win. So with that, that concludes tonight's panel. For more information, or if you're looking for an organization that you would like to become involved with, as all of our panelists have mentioned, makeroomnow.org. You can check out the website. And I can't thank you all enough. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.